Welcome back to New Rockstars. I'm Erik Voss, and this is a breakdown of House of the Dragon Season 2, Episode 5. From Driftmark to the Riverlands to the Eyrie to the Twins, I've got you covered with another scene-by-scene breakdown of all the details you missed, hidden details in the music, and deeper layers of meaning. And as always, for any book spoilers for twists in the upcoming episodes, I'm gonna leave all that speculation for the spoiler dungeon at the end of the video. And the best way to support what we do here at New Rockstars is to grab one of our House of the Dragon inspired shirts at nerdriot.shop. Okay, no updates to the opening credit tapestry for this episode, which is a bit surprising given the epic game changer of the Battle of Rook's Rest, but maybe there's just not enough green thread to capture the size of Vhagar. But we open the episode on Driftmark, the castle of high tide. They used the real-world tidal island of St. Michael's Mount in Cornwall for this island, but it looks like the tide is higher in this shot, befitting Corlys' mental state, isolated in grief ever since the death of his wife Rhaenys. The sun looks as though it's dropping beneath the castle, as with Rhaenys' death, so sets Corlys' hopes to produce a new heir like he wanted to do, as Baela and Rhaena are focused elsewhere, and deep down he knows that Jace and Joff don't really carry his blood, but Rhaenys did encourage him to make his bastards Alan and Adam of Hull proper Velaryons. In the Hall of Nine, Corlys trudges up to the Driftwood throne, which is said to have been gifted to the Velaryons by the Merling King, god of the Narrow Sea, but the blocking reminds us of Daemon in his dream at the beginning of episode 4, walking up to the Iron Throne. From Dragonstone, Rhaenyra seems to grieve along with Corlys, looking west, hoping that the raven she received was wrong and maybe Rhaenys and Meleys might appear on that horizon, but no. In King's Landing, Cat picks out some citrus fruit that's the least rotten among the bunch, an indicator of the scarce food because of the blockade by Team Black and the Gullet. And of course, Cat is the wife of Hugh Hammer! Hey, I don't like the guy that much, but I do love saying his name. Sir Criston has returned from Rook's Rest, carting the severed head of the dragon Meleys. Flies buzz around the rotting neck, and you can see the spine bone and all the meat. The smoke continues to spew from parts of it, as when Vhagar chomped down on this part of the neck, it released the glands of hot oil that these dragons use to produce their fire breath. Following the dragon cart are the banners of the houses Sir Criston forced to bend the knee: House Rosby, House Staunton, House Darklyn, and House Stokeworth. But it's the dead dragon who draws the attention.
Mark my words, this is a black omen. Rhaenyra will answer this. This is an abomination.
Yes, the commoners frown, shake their heads, even give reverent bows, you'll notice, and one of them even said it's a black omen, not just a dark omen, but an omen of the blacks coming to get revenge. Sir Criston had hoped that by parading Meleys' head in the city, using a crier to claim it was King Aegon who slayed Meleys, even though it was definitely Vhagar, that maybe that would rally the commoners into thinking the blacks weren't all that powerful, and show them that the dragon that killed hundreds of them in King Aegon's coronation in the dragon pit was finally avenged. Instead, these commoners just see this as a dark omen, and they assume Rhaenyra, whom the Greens put all that effort into telling everyone was a vengeful psycho who ordered to kill the young Prince Jaehaerys, that woman will surely get vengeance for this. Now this person beside Hugh says,
I thought the dragons was gods.
Yes, this proof of fallibility cuts both ways. Sure, one of Rhaenyra's dragons could die, but then, therefore, so could Vhagar. Hugh says,
It's just meat.
As if the destiny of all dragons is to just be eaten by other dragons. Alicent sees another cart covered in rags, knowing that this would be her wounded son, Aegon II. And we're also reminded of the tiny little boxes that they kept Joffrey's dragon Tyraxes in and Aegon the Younger's dragon Stormcloud in when they were leaving Dragonstone in episode 3. But this box is just so small to be containing a king. Alicent sees Aegon's dagger on Aemond's hip and knows from that alone that her firstborn son must be close to death. This box is carried into the Red Keep like pallbearers carrying a casket into a funeral. They pass Helena, who's wearing black, but not because she's allegiant to the blacks. Really, she's probably just still in mourning for her son Jaehaerys, but she may also be assuming her brother husband is also Dunzo. This moment reminds me of when Aegon and Helena passed each other on the steps in episode 2, and Aegon said nothing to comfort her in that moment, and now she has no words for her gravely wounded husband. As they unbox Aegon, his 3 idiot lickspittle Kingsguard buddies, Sir Leon Estermont, Sir Eddard Waters, and Sir Martin Rain, watch helplessly with their helmets on now. They're trying to be very all business and not remind everyone that they were appointed by this guy who's about to die and that everyone else hates them. And then Alicent enters and you can see some silent sisters standing off on the side. This is an order of women belonging to the Faith of Seven. They're not septas technically. They're considered wives to the stranger who take vows of silence and handle the bodies of deceased nobles. And in fact, it was probably them who actually sewed Jaehaerys' head back on his shoulders to present the body for the funeral procession. Grand Maester Orwyle is back in his medical garb.
His grace remains with us.
For the moment.
For the moment, yes, Aegon is so wounded that he could die any second. This would be the second time Alicent would be standing over the potential deathbed of a Targaryen king whose body is decaying in front of her, of course, after Aegon's father, Viserys. But this young king isn't even in a state to mumble something on his deathbed that could alter the course of history. We see a series of scary iron tools, and Orwyle pries Aegon's Valyrian steel armor off his chest, and the flesh sticks from being melted to it. Yeah, we can't show you that because of YouTube, but Aegon, you'll notice, does not scream because he's so in shock and near death that he just has no energy to make any sound. Assistants prepare these various remedies, wet lettuce or cabbage leaves, and then another aide burns incense, probably associated with the Silent Sisters. That incense smoke cannot be that helpful, but this is medieval folk medicine, folks. And back in those days, they did think that layering cabbage on injuries would reduce swelling, but unless they were to swap out those leaves regularly, the produce would rot and fester the wound. There is a motif in this episode of rotting corpses in food. These cabbage leaves, the rotten citrus fruit that Cat has to pick from, yet the fresh lemon slice used to just wash Sir Criston's sword. Like, that lemon looked as juicy and as good as any lemon I've ever seen. Also, Hugh Hammer calling Meleys' severed head meat, and Rhaenyra shooing away Elinda, asking if supper would be taken to her quarters, and then Lady Jane asking Rhaena if she would join for supper. Even the imagery of peeling the armor off Aegon is kind of like an eggshell to a hard-boiled egg. Hard-boiled Aegon! And this is all pointing to the same conclusion, that hunger is really the driving factor in a country ravaged by war like this, and the people of Westeros are ready to devour each other. Aemond, who had ordered his dragon Vhagar to give Aegon these wounds, now returning to the scene of the crime like any good arsonist to remind Alicent that someone's now going to have to rule in his place. Sir Criston polishes his sword with that salty lemon. Apparently, people still do use lemon juice and salt to clean their knives and antique swords. The lemon juice helps prevent and remove rust. The salt is gently abrasive and wouldn't leave scratches. Sir Criston reports on Rook's Rest.
I left a meager garrison behind to protect it, and the king's dragon. Sunfyre was long in the dying.
Now, to be clear to the non-book readers, the dragon Sunfyre is still alive, but Sunfyre is grounded after damage to one of his wings. But Sir Criston refuses to say exactly what fell the king, which indicates to Alicent that it wasn't Rhaenys or Meleys, because if it were, Criston would have no problem saying so. So Alicent then asks what was Aemond's part in this, and Sir Criston further confirms her worries by saying, I couldn't say. As in, it was so twisted that I cannot even speak it out loud. Sir Alfred Broom, meanwhile, knocks Lord Staunton's piece off the painted table, replacing it with a high tower piece, and snaps that their best hope for an army is Daemon, who left them after a marital spat.
It is merely that the gentler sex, heretofore, has not been much privy to the strategies of battle or their execution.
Oh my god. And their execution, Sir Alfred, by saying that, he's insulting Rhaenys for failing to execute at the Battle of Rook's Rest, when she was surprised. No one expected there to be one dragon waiting for her, let alone two. So yeah, Rhaenyra points out that since Westeros has only seen peace for the past 80 years, Sir Alfred isn't any more battle-tested than she is. All of these characters are sweet summer children. Rhaenyra mentions Maidenpool and Crackclaw Point, both of which are houses on the peninsula north of them leading into the Riverlands, but her council erupts into bickering over answering for Rook's Rest or attacking King's Landing while Vhagar is weak, and they just kind of reach a stalemate. But there's this cool edit where we cut from the painted table to Baela seated, so that if we were to go back and forth from one shot to the other, it kind of looks like Baela should be seated next to Sir Laurent at the table. But where's Baela instead? She's in the Dragonstone Archives, the chamber that's right before the Skull of Meraxes that leads to the Dragon Launchpad area, I'm calling it. In the final scene of this episode, we will learn that those archives contain Targaryen descendants and future dragon riders, and that will provide Rhaenyra with the answer that she needs back at the painted table. Meanwhile, Daemon sits atop Caraxes to meet Lord Amos Bracken, played by Tim Faraday. Amos Bracken is a head of House Bracken now. He's the son of late Humphrey Bracken. In Fire and Blood, Amos Bracken slays Samwell Blackwood in a duel at the Trident back when Rhaenyra was on her tour seeking a suitor, a scene that the HBO series changed to take place at Storm's End, where it was Willem Blackwood versus Jarrell Bracken, and in that duel they actually changed it so that Blackwood wins, not Bracken. But this whole meeting in the Riverlands does not occur in Fire and Blood. Amos Bracken at this point in history was dead after the Battle of Burning Mill, but Daemon bringing Sir Willem to his side for this is a big tactical mistake, because with a Blackwood present, there's no way Amos Bracken would submit.
I would sooner be the Lord of Bones and Cinders than bend my knee before some heathen Blackwood.
Oh, and these poor horses, by the way, they cannot stay calm in the presence of a dragon, but since Caraxes would have been a visual effect, the production and stunt writers would have had to freak out these horses in other ways. These horses deserve their own Emmy category. Bracken asks Sir Willem if his brother's head kept when it was sent back to him, and I'm guessing that might have been Davos Blackwood, the angry young Blackwood who confronted Aeron Bracken at the beginning of episode 3, The Burning Mill. There's no Davos Blackwood character in Fire and Blood, but we know Aeron Bracken was stabbed in the head with his own sword, and we don't know what happened to Davos Blackwood during that battle. Daemon is not interested in these two families spat, and he demands that Bracken bend the knee to me. Not to the queen, but to Daemon himself. Bracken chooses fire and turns away. We get this great shot of Caraxes lowering his massive head behind Bracken and his horse, and for a moment we think that they and we are about to be engulfed in fire, but no. This is kind of like when Vhagar sadly lowered her head after Aemond told her to wait last episode and she sighed impatiently into the bushes. Afterward, Daemon says,
I did not think they would be so eager to die.
The castle behind them, I'm pretty sure, is Stonehenge, home of House Bracken, as Daemon would have come to this castle to threaten the family, and they probably just rode out to greet him. And you know, back up in that castle, they're just looking out the windows at them still shitting their pants. But this conflict between the Blackwood and the Brackens actually dates back to the Age of Heroes. The Blackwoods were believed to have come from the north, driven out by the Starks, and they worshipped the old gods. But when the Andals arrived in Westeros, the Brackens, who were local horse breeding lords of the Riverlands, began worshipping the new gods, the Seven, and that religious divide was a big part of the two families hating each other. Of course, there was, turf disputes. Both families had kings that claimed to rule over the Riverlands before Aegon's conquest, and there was plenty of marriages and breeding across the families, and that the blood of both families runs on the other side. But I bring up the religious point because of all the religions in Westeros that we've learned about, we have seen evidence of the power of the old gods through the weirwood trees, the children of the forest, the three-eyed raven, etc. Evidence of the power of the red god, R'hllor, the Lord of Light, that's the monotheistic religion of Essos, through the sorcery of characters like Melisandre, and evidence of the power of the many-faced god through the workings of Jaqen H'ghar, and the fact that Arya basically becomes a super ninja by the end of Game of Thrones. But the faith of the Seven, I believe, is one religion in Westeros that has yet to have any real magic to it. So far, it just seems like a man-made institution designed to control people's decisions and self-perpetuate its power. Time and time again, the faith of the Seven makes people fanatical and stubborn and ultimately self-destructive. So not to pick a side in Blackwoods versus Brackens, because both Hatfields and McCoys here are stubborn and petty and meant to just be a thematic analog to the wanton fighting for the Targaryen factions, but I believe it says something that the Greens, whom the Brackens support, are, through Alicent, more devout to the Seven, while the Blacks, who are truer Dragon Lords we've seen so far in my opinion, seem to have a better understanding of the bullshit of the world, but are also more superstitious of dragon power, of dreams, and in Daemon's case, of spooky tree magic in the Riverlands. Daemon suggests to try more persuading, and he pauses for a long time until Willem says,
But every man has a weakness.
Yeah, Daemon is hinting, hey, commit some more crimes, will ya? This is what he did with Blood and Cheese. He just remained vague and let his proxies assume that he means to do the most heinous thing. And he whispers to Sir Willem that there are things the crown cannot be seen doing, and Sir Willem is like, got it! And he doesn't even look at Daemon, he just glares past him directly at Stonehenge, thinking, ooh, I'm gonna be so evil. Okay, onto the bloody gate that sits outside the Eyrie, the Keep of the Vale, the seat of House Arryn. We last saw it in Game of Thrones when Sansa Stark took over with the help of Littlefinger when he pushed Lysa Arryn out the moon door, and then Peter Baelish later convinced young Robin Arryn to deploy his forces to help Sansa and Jon Snow retake Winterfell from Ramsay Bolton in the Battle of the Bastards. Lady Jane Arryn now says,
over the centuries, many and more armies have broken themselves against my bloody gate.
Okay, so the entrance is called the Bloody Gate, but the way she says my bloody gate, we just have to talk about this, folks, because when Jace visited Lady Jane, a meeting that was discussed on the show but never shown, the deal was made that Lady Jane Arryn would commit to Arryn forces, helping the Blacks, in exchange for protection from a dragon at the Vale. But in Fire and Blood, the initial offer from Lady Jane to Jace was that if he could make her climax with his tongue, she would help him out. That obviously was omitted from the show, but now Jane's saying, many an army have broken themselves against my bloody gate. I think that's gotta be some kind of interesting reference by the writers, especially when she continues to say this.
The Eyrie itself is impregnable.
But getting away from this mushroom talk, I love the Eyrie as a location. Because of everywhere we've seen in Westeros, it seems like it's most fantastical and Tolkien-esque, right? It's a castle in the clouds. And I don't know how they would construct the main hall out of stone with a moon door that could open to a pit below. So now seeing the castle in its glory, long before Lysa Arryn would let it become run down into a shabby Grey Gardens state, it's just something that I've always dreamed of seeing, and I love seeing it here. Lady Jane now feels shortchanged. The Eyrie can still be attacked from the sky, and actually, she may be remembering how it was Vhagar the dragon herself, who was flown by Aegon the Conqueror's sister Visenya, that landed in the courtyard of the Eyrie, and Shera Arryn ran out to find her son, King Ronald Arryn, sitting on Visenya's knee and begging for a ride on that draggy dragon. So Shera in this moment bent the knee, and Ronald rode Vhagar 3 times around the summit of the Giant's Lance. And that's why in the opening tapestry art of every episode, we see Shera Arryn bending the knee alongside Torrhen Stark. So put yourself in the place of Lady Jane here. That same green giant creature is still alive now. She would have grown up hearing stories about that thing. And now Jane knows that Vhagar was just deployed in warfare and he felled Rhaenyra's grandmother. So why wouldn't that dragon come for another member of the Black faction and 2 of their young dragons? Rhaenyra vents to Mysaria about how despite Viserys breaking custom to name a female heir, he still raised her in the traditional female roles of knowing every lord from Storm's End to the twins. Though she shouldn't undersell that virtue, because Daemon had to ask repeatedly in past episodes about the difference between Brackens and Blackwoods, while Rhaenyra, back in season 1 episode 6, schooled the small council on the Bracken-Blackwood conflict. And if Daemon knew the River Lords better, he could be doing what Jace has been doing successfully this episode at places like the twins. Rhaenyra says that she was not taught this though.
The difference between hilt and foible.
But the fact that Rhaenyra even knows what a foible is shows that she knows far more about swordsmanship than most people do. The hilt refers to the general region of the sword that you hold, the grip, the pommel that's on the end of it, and the crossguard. The foible, which is where we derive the English word of feeble, is the weakest region of the blade, and it's actually the upper half of it leading up to the point. Because when you swing a sword, all the force is concentrated in the middle section as you're approaching the hilt. That's what you want to hit your target with. That's referred to as the forte, or the strong, because your hand and the wrist are really the fulcrums of this lever that your arm is forming with the weapon. The fact that Rhaenyra knows it's not the pointy end that matters, I think we can look at as a feminine focus away from the tip. Yes, she's wiser and stronger than she thinks at the end of the day. Rhaenyra says Daemon doesn't respect her either, and Elinda cuts in.
And Daemon as well.
Shall your evening meal be served here, Your Grace?
Not now.
Oh, poor Elinda. She's not wrong to encourage Rhaenyra to eat in the archives. It is where all the answers are. Rhaenyra bemoans being a supplicant to Daemon and walks towards the skull of Meraxes, which was the dragon ridden by Aegon the Conqueror's sister wife Rhaenys, the wife who had to stand and fly at the side of a man. Mysaria counsels Rhaenyra that parading Meleys' head through the streets was a mistake, that the commoners of King's Landing saw it as a bad omen, which they could actually use to their advantage here.
To the discontented, rumors are feed.
Yes, we come back to the food motif of this episode and the concept of panem et circenses, which is Latin for bread and circuses, or really just like food and games, coming from the Roman poet Juvenal, who said that the way to appease the populace of the people of Rome is to just keep them fed and distract them with games, which is why they had gladiator combat. That's also why in Hunger Games they call it panem, and that is your daily recommended dose of thinking about the Roman Empire. Mysaria is saying that when people are starving, they end up being more susceptible to gossip and to superstition and to propaganda, and that's going to be what they use here. Rhaenyra and Baela recall the story of when Rhaenys claimed Meleys when she snuck into the dragon pit.
My father was furious. His own mother's dragon. The fastest beast ever known, and she'd have none of him.
So Baela is referring to Alyssa, mother to Daemon and to Viserys, who rode Meleys before Rhaenys did. Daemon would then claim Caraxes, who was a dragon of Rhaenys' father, Aemond, who was Alyssa and Balon's brother. And we will meet Alyssa, or a form of her, in a bit. Ugh. But it's interesting to learn that Meleys refused to bond with Daemon initially, instead choosing another female rider, while Daemon felt that his mother's dragon should have gone to him but was taken from him, which reminds us of how Baela and Rhaena felt after their mother's she-dragon Vhagar should have gone to one of them, but Aemond cut in line to claim Vhagar instead. The choices of these beasts, or maybe even just their whims or their instincts, or their affinity for one silver-haired kid over another, have enormous impact on the way history unfolds. I like details like this because it's something that we never really got in Fire and Blood. This scene began with Rhaenyra holding up the box containing the hand of the queen pin, but Rhaenyra recognized that Baela wanted to reminisce about her grandmother for a bit, so she sets the box down, but now she picks it back up when she sees that she can pivot to asking Baela to help her with Corlys. And in this shot, Rhaenyra suddenly looks forward into the fire to say that she doesn't want to stand alone, and then we cut to Daemon. And I love this edit because in the second to last scene of the episode, we'll do a reverse edit where we cut from Daemon back to Rhaenyra over a fireplace. But now Daemon is in the cold moonlight in a sex dream with some mystery silver-haired vixen. The pale wood of the weirwood tree bed frame fills the background, as this would be another haunting vision given to him by the old gods in this wood.
If only you'd been born first, my favorite son.
Yuck! So this is Alyssa Targaryen, mother to Daemon and Viserys. And I suppose Daemon was so physically close to her, seeing the silver hair from behind, lost in the haze of the dream, flattered by her compliments, that he did not realize at first that this was his own mommy. Hey, people confusing one family member for another is a recurring theme on this show, but also this recontextualizes Daemon's type for silver-haired women, particularly ones he's related to, with his appetite for Rhaenyra. This guy's got an Oedipus complex. And it makes us rethink about Mysarea's line to him all the way back in the pilot episode.
What troubles you, my prince? I could bring in another. Could even arrange one with Sunfyre.
Was his reaction really about Rhaenyra or really about his own mother? Alyssa died in childbirth to a third son, a brother to Viserys and Daemon, who would have been named Aegon. Daemon sees blood from his hand on Alyssa's neck, blood that is not on his hand when he looks at it, reminding us of the blood on his hand that he woke up with in episode 4, but it was not on his hand when he looked at it again. Now this blood may be linked to the severed head of Alyssa's dragon, Meleys. If there's one thing House of the Dragon really drives home, it's that knowing who has which dragons and what they're planning on torching with them is really useful information. And look, nobody's got dragons outside of Westeros, but there are a few wars going on and a presidential election in a few months, so it's imperative that we stay informed. And Weapons and Warfare has your 6. Weapons and Warfare from Straight Arrow News is a weekly show that helps keep you up to date on America's entanglements with diplomacy, warfare, foreign policy, and more. From boot camp to boots on the ground, host Ryan Robertson provides in-depth coverage of international armed conflicts and the latest technological developments in weaponry worldwide. Weapons and Warfare helps you be better informed, be better engaged, and be a better global citizen. Weapons and Warfare has new episodes every Wednesday that you can watch at san.com/NRS. You can also listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Once again, catch new episodes of Weapons and Warfare every Wednesday, hosted by Brian Robertson at san.com/NRS. Now, Daemon finds himself in the middle of a meal. Food again coming back this episode, right? As the chunk of a way too rare piece of duck meat drops blood into the white sauce on his plate. Maybe it was undercooked because it's hard to build fires in the hearts of Harrenhal, but Daemon just saw Alys Rivers handling bloody animal tissue, so I can imagine him not being hungry for duck or for goose or for anything. Like, why do they need both types of fatty bird meat? And we get back-to-back point of view shots of Sir Simon and then his other relatives staring directly into camera, and behind Sir Simon, Alys is eyeing Daemon suspiciously as she pours wine. Both this episode and last episode, when Daemon woke up from a dream, he was in the middle of a meal, and I think we can assume both times that he was being drugged by Alys's cocktail. Sir Simon says that Harrenhal repairs are moving along slowly.
The roof alone has needed tending since the reign of Rhaenys, and the storerooms and the Wailing Tower.
So Aenys was the son of Aegon the Conqueror and the second ruler of this dynasty. He died in 42 AC. Events are now taking place in 129 AC. So it's been about 90 years there. The Wailing Tower is one of the 5 melted towers of this castle, so named for a wailing sound formed by the wind blowing through the cracks. And it's believed to be haunted by the cries of Harren the Black and his sons, even though they were actually burned in a different tower, the Kingspire Tower. We might have heard those wails in the dream as Daemon was hooking up with his mom. And those could also be the same screams that Daemon has been hearing outside of his door every night. Sir Simon says that the bats have made the corridors filled with
the quantity of their
shit.
Yeah, and on this line, that other strong relative looks up at the ceiling at a flapping bat. Daemon orders to levy everyone from antlers to high heart for smiths and for food. But Sir Simon says that since Larys depleted the family coffers after Lionel Strong's death, Larys affords them only a small amount to cover their food. And I think Larys even offers that much, really just to keep Alys Rivers on the payroll, to conduct her witchcraft and to keep the castle extra spooky for an extra drugged up Daemon. There's a mural on the wall depicting weirwood trees and their white trunks and their red leaves beside the God's Eye Lake. These were the trees that were chopped down to build Harrenhal. And after Sir Simon pushed Daemon for funding, Daemon says,
"You should address me as my king."
But you're the prince.
What would you call the husband of the queen?
Well, the king.
There it is then.
Consort.
Daemon says that the last bit is unnecessary. He's totally moving the goalposts after his earlier corrections to Sir Simon to call him Your Grace. He's saying, if you're going to insist on funding, I am going to insist on a semantic crown. While it was a swirled mix of white and red that irked Daemon on his plate, now it's a swirled mix of white and black on Alicent's that irks her attendance ball in the Green Small Council. Aegon's attendance ball just sits lonely in the table center, unclaimed. As Orwell says,
"Our king's fate lies with the gods now."
After discussing the old gods versus the new gods, we are left wondering which of these gods are really going to be the effective ones in this world. Alicent pitches herself as regent, but encounters the same sexist bullshit from Ironrod that Rhaenyra got from Sir Alfred. They said that she was a good peacetime regent, but now it needs to go to Aegon's heir, Prince Aemond, which brings up the writer's decision this season to omit Aegon and Helena's second son from the book, Maelor, from the HBO series. Perhaps they just wanted to simplify this debate and clear Aemond's path to become Prince Regent. But really, Otto and Alicent pushing that Viserys' heir had to be Aegon according to male primogeniture, Alicent's really made her own bed here, because now the council has no problem shutting down a more deserving woman, and this includes Larys, who says that it needs to be Aemond, but he quickly deflects.
But the hand speaks with the king's voice, Sir Criston. What say you?
I love the focus shift from Larys to Criston in this glance occurring behind Alicent's back. Criston avoids eye contact with Larys and with Alicent. He can feel all the eyes on him for his relationship with Alicent and how awkward it is now for him to betray her. Aemond, who literally has said nothing this entire scene, now just springs up the moment Sir Criston says his name, and Dwight Schrute's control over the room, snatching Aegon's ball out of the frame from its position in front of Alicent and plops it into its place. And then immediately just goes to work. He asks the room about their standing in the Riverlands, and he turns to look at Sir Criston, who uncomfortably looks away because Sir Criston is still disgusted with the war crimes Aemond committed on the battlefield, and Aemond knows that he's disgusted with him and is just testing him with his look. The camera pushes in on Alicent as she hyperventilates, feeling the weight of her choices as decisions now are just getting made around her by the men at the table, literally taking away her voice in this room. Orwell warns about the small folk in King's Landing growing hungry due to the blockade, and Aemond's solution is to close the gates and lock everyone in. Why would that be a good idea, Aemond? Well, if you think about it, he knows that if all the small folk were to flee King's Landing and just leave the nobles in the Red Keep, that would make a much easier target for Rhaenyra to burn, because it would mean less collateral damage, and she could welcome everyone back into the city. So really, he is locking these people in as human shields. I mentioned Hunger Games earlier. It is kind of like President Snow bringing all the kids in front of his mansion. On Aemond's orders, they finally cut down the bodies of the rat catchers, and Jesus, poor doggo, has been waiting here the whole time. It has been 3 weeks at least, folks, and while I assume it's just loyalty, it's also possible that this dog is just starving and living off the chunks of flesh that fall off these bodies. There's been a lot of chatter online about how long it would take a dog or a cat to start eating its owner after the person died and no one found the body, something that is increasingly a concern, because, you know, just a lot of people are becoming cat people and dog people with fur babies. And, you know, there's not any actual statistical data on this, because how would you even conduct that? But anecdotally, EMTs have reported that dogs tend to be protective of their owners' bodies, but then after the weeks go by and the body begins to putrefy, all bets were off, because the scent changes and the dog no longer recognizes the body as their owner. Just remember that when your dog wags their tail at you, it's not your smile, it's your stink. Now, the workers carting these bodies away cover their noses, and one bows his head when he passes the Lord Hand Criston, but I also think he might just be gagging from the insane smell. And while Alicent covers her nose, Criston doesn't even flinch because he has no soul. And because his olfactory glands were nuked after smelling burning flesh at Rook's Rest, and his nasal passages are probably clogged with human ash. Alicent rips Sir Criston for picking Aemond over her.
You know what he is. What he has somehow become.
Somehow. She holds Criston and his secret plotting with Aemond responsible for Aemond's barbarism, and not, you know, all the shit Alicent allowed him to get away with since he was a kid. All the scripted comebacks Alicent probably wished she could have said at the small council table, now she flings in Sir Criston's face.
Has your loyalty faded, or does it flourish only at night and flee the sunrise like a moth?
Like a moth? She's accidentally invoking the phrase like a moth to a flame, and flame, for Criston, fire bad!
Their armor melted. There were men walking, they were on fire.
We have given the war to the dragons.
Wow, the fear that Fabian Frankel brings to this moment. He's kind of like J. Robert Oppenheimer telling President Truman, I feel like I have blood on my hands. And now it makes sense why he instinctively paraded Meleys' head through the city, because for him, this would be a kind of form of relief, disarmament, right? One less nuclear weapon out there. Shouldn't we all celebrate that? Sir Criston says he wanted to spare Alicent from the soul-crushing weight of the decisions that lay before them now.
I did not ask to be spared. I did not give you leave to speak my name.
The way Daemon policed Sir Simon on how to address him, so too now does Alicent to Criston. Hugh and Kat bring their sick daughter through a crowd of people to the gate, but the gold cloaks close it off. An overhead shot shows how packed with extras they got for this scene, but you can make out Hugh's silver hair, which in this instance really just makes him stand out. Out here in the daylight, their daughter looks particularly pale. Kat's earlier line about feeding the mouths of ghosts is happening before their eyes. The crowd demands, "We want meat! The hunger motif returns. Trapping them in here has turned them into rats in a cage. Too bad you killed off all the rat catchers. Jace's dragon Vermax perches over the twins, the seat of House Frey, seen in Game of Thrones during the Red Wedding episode and in the season 7 premiere when Arya got her revenge on House Frey. Jace taps his fingers on his knee. Now, we've been pointing out all season how his hands always fidgets, and he calms himself by placing them on his pommel. There might be something more to this, like Alicent's finger picking, or like in Saving Private Ryan, Captain Miller's hand trimmer. Jace is so filled with anxiety over being forced to stand down that he cannot calm his Targaryen blood. We as viewers have a natural anxiety anytime we go to the twins, because Jace is currently the closest thing we have to Robb Stark on this show. Lord Frey nibbles on some bread and they drink. Bread and salt are the historical symbols of hospitality, and it was that assumption of hospitality that Walder Frey violates. Once again, food is being used as a way to leverage power. Their table is a large door piled on stone blocks. They hold this meeting in the exact center of the bridge, like prisoner transfers on neutral ground of bridges like the DMZ in Korea, or the Bridge of Spies in that Spielberg movie. But the twins is the only crossing point of the Green Fork of the Trident for miles, making them a critical passageway for any army moving north or south. That's why Robb Stark needed them in Game of Thrones, and that's why Jace needs them to secure Cregan Stark's army of Greybeards making their way south. The Freys, meanwhile, just fear Vhagar more than Vermax looking down at them, because the dragon Vermax is plainly younger and less battle-tested. Like Lady Jane, what they fear is not any dragon, it's the largest, most senile dragons with the craziest riders. And at that point, that means Vhagar with Aemond and Caraxes with Daemon. And Jace senses that, and he promises his protection and the protection of Daemon and Caraxes. But the Freys, no strangers to looking gift dragons in the mouth, ask Jace if Daemon actually said that or not. The Freys reveal that they want Harrenhal, and Jace downs his cup, holding it out for a refill, a symbolic gesture that he trusts them and he's open to a deal. But Jace says that for that, Rhaenyra will need
bent knees. Bees?
Compare this to how Daemon asked for bent knees in the Riverlands by demanding Amos Bracken bend the knee just to him, not to Rhaenyra. But Jace says just bent knees, presumably to Rhaenyra, the rightful queen. Daemon chops wood at Harrenhal. He hears screams that come right upon him swinging the axe, as if he is the executioner to the war crimes that are being committed at this moment. Alys Rivers is watching him from above. She's clearly sending these sounds into his mind. The sound of Bracken women being taken away and killed at Stonehenge by the Blackwoods. Alys says,
"You're born to wield a sword, but not so much an axe."
Yeah, she's dissing his woodsman skills, but also in a way, she's saying, you're a lord, not an executioner. Act like a king. Also, she's saying, woodsmen in these parts of the country cut down weirwood trees. Are you sure you want to declare war on those trees? You sure about that? Alys confirms that she knows about the war crimes being committed at Stonehenge at this moment.
There's news then.
News? What I hear in the wind.
So news in this world is brought by ravens, and ravens always bring bad news. Remember, the first shot of this season was a raven bringing bad news. But as a woods witch, she doesn't need ravens and scrolls. The trees tell her the truth that she needs. I speculated last week that she could be a warg. And to be clear, I'm not saying that Alys is a shapeshifter, that she became an owl. Wargs are not shapeshifters. Wargs are just people who can use animals to see through their eyes. Daemon hears the screams again as Alys shames him about the women and children being taken away, husbands coming home to find their doors unlatched. Daemon accepts that war is just a terrible thing. And it's just interesting to hear Alys talk. As a potentially 400-year-old witch, she speaks with a kind of authorial judgment on these events and these characters, someone removed from history looking back upon it, telling these men what they need to be told. And that includes what all the women on this show wish they were saying to the stubborn men in their lives. In this case, it's calling out Daemon for acting without Rhaenyra's consent and forcing him to confess what he really plans to do. And finally, we hear it for the man of few words.
When I take King's Landing, Rhaenyra is welcome to join me there and take her place by my side, king and queen, ruling together.
Alys says it's a pity that he never knew his mother, confirming she knew what he was dreaming about. Daemon gets the news that the Blackwoods have overwhelmed the Brackens at Stonehenge, and he holds out his axe and it's kind of like high five gesture. Corlys tells Baela,
"My castle is a tomb. Empty. Haunted.
I am sad to have missed its highest days.
We're kind of reminded of the way Gandalf talked about Minas Tirith to Pippin in Return of the King.
Kings made tombs more splendid than the houses of the living, and counted the old names of their descent dearer than the names of their sons.
And now Corlys is the childless lord, sitting in his aged hall, musing on heraldry, asking questions of the stars. Baela says that all of his quests to Yiti and Ashai, his countless treasures, were all for her, for Rhaenys, which is also reflective of Looking Glass's Brandy, You're a Fine Girl, which James Gunn featured in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, unpacked by the character Ego. It's a story of a sailor who sings, Brandy, you're a fine girl, what a good wife you would be, but my life, my love, and my lady is the sea. Corlys has wasted so much of his life on the sea, away from his wife, and Baela is using that to argue that his adventures as a seafarer really surrendered his right to be the sole mourner of Rhaenys, because Rhaenys was also a Targaryen princess and a dragon rider who also meant a lot to dragon lords. Baela says that Rhaenys dying in Dragonfire and Laena dying in Dragonfire is how she wishes to die someday. Corlys, impressed by her words, offers to make her his heir, but she responds,
I am blood and fire. Driftmark must pass to salt and sea.
So I believe Corlys in this moment must be hearing this as, well, I guess who's more salt and sea in my life now than those two whole boys? Daemon lies awake at night hearing the screams of Bracken men. Sir Simon wakes him at the hour of the wolf, and wolf would be around 4 a.m., the darkest part of the night. And I think it's interesting that it's the hour of the wolf, because is this scene that follows a dream, or is it something that actually happens? Because we see these rain-soaked river lords standing beneath the mural of the weirwood trees that I pointed out before, making them kind of like the voices of the old gods themselves, to shame Daemon for the barbarity of the Blackwood's actions, saying that they were done so under Targaryen banners of red and black, even after he instructed Sir Willem not to connect them to him. Ghost Laena appears again, distracting Daemon, and one of these lords steps forward and says,
We should have expected nothing more from a man who ordered the slaughter of a child in his mother's arms.
I truly thought that Daemon was gonna pull out Dark Sister and slaughter these lords, but he just says, it's a lie! And he lets them get away with saying this, even as the woman steps forward to say,
Know this, interloper. The Riverlands are an ancient place, watched closely by the eyes of old gods and new.
Yeah, I'm wondering if Daemon might be so sleep deprived and delirious that he's just not sure if this is a shame dream or not, and that kind of paralyzes him in inaction. And we cut from Daemon with his hand resting on the hearth to Rhaenyra doing the same on Dragonstone, as if these two are looking into the same fire, their thoughts dwelling upon each other. We see Rhaenyra's handmaid Elinda making it to King's Landing, telling a gold cloak that she was sent with a message from Mysaria, and she makes her way to Dyana. Elinda and Dyana were both maids in the Red Keep in season 1. Elinda was actually the one who summoned Rhaenyra to come to Alicent just after Joffrey was born in season 1, episode 6. And Dyana, of course, was the girl Aegon assaulted, whom Alicent gave the moon tea to, and Dyana just resurfaced at the pub this season unnoticed by Aegon. I think Elinda's mission may be to track down anyone with dirt on Alicent and Aegon and the Greens. Now, I don't think the people of King's Landing are so puritanical and virtuous that they're gonna care that much that the king slept around and his mom forced a moon tea abortion. The commoners are way more worried about meat right now. But I do think that Dyana might know about the bastards that Aegon does have, including that little old Game On Palehair, the kid from the fighting pits in season 1, episode 9. And those kids could be used to cause a stir over Aegon and Aemond and Alicent's claim to power. That kid does end up leading some political drama later on in the history of this conflict that I've talked about in past spoiler dungeons, but I don't know if it's something that would come up until a bit later on in this conflict, maybe a future season. Aemond faces the Iron Throne with a look of desire that matched Daemon's in his dream in season 2, episode 4. His sister Helena appears behind him asking,
Was it worth the price?
Just the sound mix of the scene, the lightning clashes, and the blocking of it, it kind of makes this scene feel like the kind of dreams and visions that Daemon has been experiencing in Harrenhal. But in place of Alice Rivers as the woman asking the piercing question, now it's Aemond's sister Helena, who is also a dreamer with visions of the future. Whereas Alicent stayed at her husband Viserys' side throughout all of his pained utterances, drawing wildly incorrect interpretations from the babbling, now she refuses to do the same with her son Aegon, but what she misses now is just the simplest truth that cuts so deep. It is so heartbreaking to hear him say mummy. And for the first time, I feel bad for Aegon, but I also feel kind of bad for Alicent, because I think what might help her the most right now is for one of the men in her life to actually need her and to express love. Rhaenyra ends this episode reading an old text about Visenya, sister to Aegon the Conqueror, first rider of Vhagar, and the first wielder of Dark Sister, she notes, because Rhaenyra is seeking insight for how to defeat both Aemond, who rides Vhagar, and her husband, Daemon, who wields Dark Sister. Both Alicent and Rhaenyra have been digging through history texts these two episodes seeking answers, while Jace is right to point out that it's not really the ancient history that will serve her in this time because there's no precedent for what she's going through. It's more recent genealogy records on the higher shelves. Jace says that they have no shortage of dragons.
We have no dearth of dragons. We have Vermithor and Silverwing.
Yes, we have actually seen Vermithor and Silverwing in the opening tapestry visuals of every episode. They are the bronze and silver colored dragons ridden by Jaehaerys I, aka Jaehaerys the Conciliator, and by his wife, Queen Alysanne. These were the dragons Cregan Stark referenced in episode 1 of the season, the dragons who refused to fly north of the wall. Vermithor was the massive dragon that Daemon sang the Valyrian lullaby to back in the season 1 finale. So Jace proposes to find the descendants of Targaryens who married into other families like Malister and Tully, and Rhaenyra says the blood would be thin and dragons would only accept dragon lords according to the histories, but Jace says,
Valyrian histories, written to gild us in glory.
Yeah, Jace has a point. Fully Valyrian-blooded nobles like Aemond and Rhaena struggled to bond with dragons, so maybe the whole nobility requirement is bullshit, and these dragons are just picking people who smell good, like our dogs who refuse not to eat us. This episode ends in a kind of silly mustache-twirling vibe, where the scrolls and scrolls stacked right in front of Meraxes contain the answers of their true descendants and possible writers. Rhaenyra says,
"It's a mad thought."
As if to say, it's just so mad that it might work. And then Jace is thinking, don't we all go a little mad sometimes, mother? And Rhaenyra's like, if we win this, our line might give us a mad king and a mad queen. Yeah, it's kind of stupid. On to the spoiler dungeon, where we're gonna spoil some plot details from Fire and Blood and what's coming in episodes 6, 7, and 8, and maybe even season 3. So yes, it's a kind of silly place to end this episode. But next episode will show us the sowing of the seeds and establish the dragon seeds, a term first uttered by Ulf the White this season. And these dragon seeds who are connected to the Valyrian bloodlines include Adam and Alan of Hull, and Ulf the White, and Hugh Hammer. Hugh is gonna ride Vermithor, so I guess that kid is just gonna croak and his wife will leave him and he's gonna get dragged to Dragonstone. Ulf is gonna ride Silverwing, and in fact, maybe it was even Dyana overheard him talking about his lineage, and she's gonna be like, you know what, I think there's a Valyrian in the pub that I work at. And Adam of Hull is gonna ride Seasmoke, but Alan of Hull is gonna get burned very badly by Sheep Stealer. I don't think they've cast anyone for Nettles this season, unfortunately, but based on this episode's slow pacing, I'm just not sure how much of this process they're gonna get through this season. But maybe we will end the season with some people on Dragonback and the Battle of the Gullet and Jace's death. Maybe even Baela's death too, the way she was talking about how she wants to die this episode, but that would also mean curtailing everything with Baela that happens with her life after this point. Spoiler 2, Cat tells Hugh Hammer we should make for Tumbleton. And Tumbleton is an interesting city to mention because that will become the site of a major battle, probably in season 3, because that's gonna be the battle where Hugh and Ulf first unleash their dragons and ambush the Blacks. Yep, that's right. Hugh and Ulf are freaking traitors, and that's why I don't like Hugh that much. The town of Tumbleton is gonna get burned to the ground in that battle, and Hugh is not gonna be very happy about it. Daemon tells Alys that she should pray she never meets Aemond One-Eye, which is kind of fun because in Fire and Blood, Aemond is gonna come to Harrenhal, and Aemond will take Alys as his lover, even siring a child with her, but I don't know if that's gonna happen on the show, because given Alys's moral stances and pacifism this episode, is she gonna approve of a guy like Aemond? Are they gonna give Alys Rivers more agency on this show? Is she gonna play like a bigger role talking down to all these guys? Spoiler 4, Rhaenyra says to Sir Alfred Broom that he would never accept Aegon's claim to the throne, and there's a very pregnant pause in that scene, and he can't really look her in the eyes, but then he says, "Not while I live, your grace," which is, fun for him to say, because this guy is going to end up betraying Rhaenyra when the Greens come to Dragonstone. Comment down below with your thoughts on this episode. Follow me at EA Voss. Subscribe to all 3 channels of the new Rockstars Network for breakdowns and news coverage of everything you love. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.